Welcome. This is Sandra Hess, Executive Director of the Calaveras Wine Grape Alliance. Pleased to meet up here in interview number 4 with Kevin Locke from Locke Vineyards and Stu Mass from Bryce Station. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice
Yeah,
to
welcome
hear.
to.
Thank you so much. I know a lot going on here in the wine industry as we are meeting here mid-May. As we get into session number 4 today and talk about the wine region that's grown through friendships. It would be great if you could each introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what brought you to Calaveras Wine Country.
I came to Calaveras County in 1984. It's been a while, but had nothing to do with wine country then. I was working for the Forest Service in Tuolumne County. I'd worked there for 4 or 5 years and had an opportunity to transfer over here. And it is always a place where I wanted to move to since I was a little boy. We came up here and camped at Calaveras Big Tree State Park, went to Murphy's, remember going to Mercer Caverns and all of that. So I wanted to come here when I had the opportunity to transfer over here because it was a community, it was a small town, just reminded me of one of those quintessential little small towns, and figured it'd be a great place to raise a family and start a life over here, and jumped at the opportunity. But there was really not much going on with the wine industry. It wasn't on my radar at the time.
I'm sure. Thank you.
I moved here in 1978. I married a local gal that we married in '76. We worked on my parents' farm. I'm a fifth generation farmer from the Sacramento Valley. And a couple of years after that, we decided to move up here back to her family homestead. Her grandparents bought this property where we have Bryce Station Vineyards. They bought it back in the 1940s, and my wife was raised here. She went to two-room schoolhouse. Coincidentally, I went to a two-room schoolhouse as well in the little town where I grew up of Zamora. But we decided this would be a great place to live and raise our kids. And I worked with her parents for a number of years, but in the meantime, that was '78. In '92, there was a huge forest fire that Kevin can well remember. The old Gulch fire roared through this
I was
place,
there.
and yeah, we it's after the fire, we're going, okay, we just lost 100 acres of timber, and uh, we 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 met with some of the local winemakers, and Barden Steveno in particular. Chuck Hovey was working for Barden, and Steve Milliere and Dave Olson. They all said, there's no reason you can't grow good Bordeaux grapes at 3,300 feet, which is where we are, one of the highest elevation vineyards in the state. So we, as things turned out, we planted our first grapes in 1993, and have a total of 7 acres here, and that was the genesis of Bryce Station Vineyards.
Interesting time when you think about the conversations you were having with Barden Steveno and Chuck about the opportunity to plant at the highest elevation. And so did you all kind of sit down and look at other areas, wine regions of the world that had higher elevation vineyard sites? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, I, being a farm boy, I had lived here for a number of years, and I always thought, oh, this is too high an elevation for grapes, and nobody else was doing it. But yeah, we did look at the Bordeaux regions, which is very similar climate, and what we have. I mean, they said you won't regret it. You'll do great, because we have the cool nights but the warm days, and the Bordeaux's, the key to that is their buds push out later in the spring, so we avoid those April, early May frosts. So, that was fantastic advice, and it certainly has worked, and we're doing high quality wine here. But I started out as a grape grower, selling grapes to Black Sheep and Milliere and a couple and Steveno, and there wasn't a lot going on in the county at the time. I mean, compared to what it is today, and so I was selling some grapes to a couple of wineries in the Napa Valley, and going just great. But it was hard to get information back in those days. They're just so uh,
You just
you
kind of
know.
learn by doing, right, Stu?
Yeah, yeah. We
Did a lot
just
of things. You helped me with some projects, and yeah, we just kind of learned by doing it.
we're the definition of entrepreneurs. We just let's try it and see if it works.
Yeah.
And I hear that. I'm hearing that a lot in these interviews about the history of Calaveras wine. So, Kevin, I recall that your father spent time at Sunset Magazine and loved gardening and had a passion for gardening. And so, did that also carry over to then your passion for starting a winery?
Yeah, that was on my dad's side. He was always doing things. He grew bonsai plants and cacti down the Bay. I grew up down the Bay Area, but on my mother's side, my grandfather had a vineyard in
Oh,
he was a farmer, and he had plums in Santa Rosa, almonds in Orland, and he had a vineyard in Lodi. And it was tough, Then that's all I remember that he worked really hard and didn't make a lot of money. And none of my uncles wanted to do that. Farming was not cool back then. It was they wanted to do different things. So they ended up selling off all the farms. But I always remember going to some of the farms, the ranches when I was little, and I always just thought it was a great thing, and didn't know why they didn't want to keep it. I grew up in Santa Clara, which was when I was little was it was still known as the prune capital of the world, believe it or not. That there were prune orchards all over there, and I kind of watched all that disappear when I grew up, and was kind of sad, and always wanted to live and grow, move to an area where there was agriculture and open spaces. So 1995 is when we bought our first vineyard, not that long after Stuart started his. We bought a vineyard out in Mountain Ranch. That's our other vineyard where all of our Zinfandel is, and that started in 1995. And then later in the 90s, 1999 is when we planted our vineyard on Highway 4, which Stuart helped build the fence, right, Stuart? Still
That's
standing.
right. Yeah.
And he helped expand some of the vineyard out there in Mountain Ranch. So, yeah, one of your questions were, all the people that you got to know through the years, and there were so many of them. There were a lot of different ones. For me, out there was Al Beckman, Rocco Malvini. A lot of these people who unfortunately are no longer with us, but they were some of the pioneers in. And what I always got from them was everybody had a passion and wanted to learn, and it was all trial by error, like we talked about. And nobody was big time, really, except of course the Couches were a different scale than all of us, but a lot of us were just small family things starting. And
how neat to hear that, Stu, you helped Kevin build his fence out at the vineyard.
Yeah, I had people. I put my vineyard in '93, and in about '94, '95, uh, Ian Renner, Dr. Renner, came to me, and he had a cattle ranch out on Arolla Road, and he said, "I want to put a vineyard out there, and I like what you're doing. I like your style, and would you help me uh, get started with grapes?" And so, besides putting him in contact with all the folks that had helped me get started, uh, I physically went out there and planted the first about 10 acres for him, which has turned into a huge vineyard these days. He's passed away these days, but that was the beginning of the Renner Vineyards. My wife and I managed that for a number of years for him, and uh, and I helped tanners in a lot of ways, and helped them design their vineyard and their trellis system, and they knew they could always come to me uh, with any questions, just because I was a few years ahead of them. Not that I knew it all, but Steve came to me one day and said, "Hey, we need a growers group that we can basically share knowledge." And so Steve and Mark Skinfield, who was another local vineyard manager, the three of us got together and we started the. It was separate from the Calaveras Wine Alliance to begin with, able to share information, particularly about the viticulture end of things, the grape growing, uh, and then it's now evolved into part of the Calaveras Wine Alliance.
Mhm. Well, thank you for that. And so, Kevin, when we think about friendships and the spirit of newbies coming up to Calaveras County and starting in the winemaking side of things, I love the story about Matt Hatcher, ice cream delivery route up
Yeah,
Highway
Matt.
4.
Yeah, somebody came to me and said, "Hey, there's this guy that wants to buy grapes from you, you know, and he wants to try to start making some wine." And I said, "Yeah, well, okay. So who is he?" And they said, "Oh, he's the ice cream man from Modesto." And I said, "Who? Ice cream man wants to buy grapes? Sure, as long as he got cash, you know, and he's going to pay me that day. I don't care." So, but he said, "Yeah." I talked to him, and he said, "Yeah, I'll come up. I'll bring my truck up there, and I'll get your grapes." And I thought, well, he's going to drive his pickup truck. Well, he pulls up, and he's got a Dryer's ice cream truck, you know. And I said, "Wow, we're going to put the grapes in there." He said, "Sure, it's refrigerated." And I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea. You're going down to Modesto, where it's probably 100 degrees. So that was the first time I ever sold him grapes. Was we put grapes back in the back of his ice cream truck, and he drove off. And that was the start of a friendship and a business relationship that's lasted almost 30 years. You know, and he just delivered a bunch of my wine and helped me, you know, bring his forklift to unload it. And it's always been that way, right, Stu? Is that people have always helped each other here. And you know, I went early on to a class at UC Davis, and they asked one of the first questions, "How many of you want to get into the wine business?" And you know, I kind of raised my hand. We were all kind of young and dumb, didn't know better, but raised our hand. He said, "Well, how many cases do you plan on making?" I thought, "Oh, I'll kind of aim high, maybe 1,000 or 1,500." And they said, "Well, you got no business getting into the wine end unless you're making, you know, 50,000 cases or more, because you'll go broke. You don't have enough capital." And they said the most important thing is to build relationships or friendships so you can help share and you know, get involved in a crush relationship and be able to share it, because most of you aren't at the scale where you can survive and really do it by yourself. And that was probably the best class I ever took, because that was a good piece of advice. And I always took that to heart, that build long-term relationships and people that you can trust and rely upon, and get knowledge and help, because none of us are that big up here, but it's help weave this whole spirit of community and camaraderie that goes through the Grape Stomp and a lot of the events that we have, and that Friday, you know, meetings that Stuart has talked about. I remember going to some of those 20 something years ago, and still have, you know, don't make them all, but I still love going to those when I can.
You know, just to avoid others' mistakes, everybody's willing to share, and the same goes with winemaking. I started out as a grape grower. I've been a home winemaker since I was in college, when my roommates and I picked enough grapes to fill a barrel of Barbera, and it was great for a while until it oxidized. And oh, that's we got to deal with making sure the barrels are topped up. But that was the genesis of my winemaking experience. And in 2001, I made my first commercial wine, and that's that's another story. I was selling grapes to a winery in Napa, Bell Cellars, and Anthony Bell said, "Why don't you come over when you deliver the grapes and just stick around for a few days and see how we do things?" And I was thrilled to be able to be part of that, and he taught me a lot. I had another fellow show up at my winery in 1999, and say his family wanted to pick a ton of grapes for their home wine production. And this was Bill Beasy, and Bill had been a home winemaker for 40 years. They picked the grapes, the whole family showed up, and invited Dolores and I for dinner, and uh, uh, and we started making home wine with them. And Bill had been doing this for 40 years, and really he was an engineer and just took copious notes, and I learned a lot from him. I took more and more classes at UC Davis, and uh, both in viticulture and enology, and that's kind of the beginning of things for me. And at this point, I'm a 2,000 case winery, and uh, it's a great way of life.
You have your own working winery there at the highest elevation vineyards at Bryce Station.
Yes, I do. Since 2001, we've been making our own wine here. So it's yeah, it's a great great family business, and it pays the bills. And I'm not nobody's getting rich around here in these small wineries, but we make a decent living, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
20, looking at how the area continues to evolve with families. And to your point, Kevin, this is not a big wine region. I mean, we're talking 40 tasting rooms, yes, but it's all family run. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about Calaveras wine country. And I think about even Rob and Sherry Hendricks with the Aloria Vineyards and taking over the old Brenner property. You got another family who fell in love with the area over the years that had to finally make it their home. And so, Kevin, if you'd like to share with us a little bit of maybe your history coming up. I mean, obviously getting started with Stu helping you build the fence at the vineyard, and now your beautiful vineyard property off Highway 4 there at Lock Vineyards. Other stories you'd like to share about the community of friendship and spirit?
Well, I think it goes back, like Stuart said, all these people that have been integral and through the years, but all of them, I think, is the willingness to help you. That, like Stuart said, that Al Beckman, I used to the first vineyard I had, I'd stop by there, and he would always invite me in for lunch, come over to lunch, and he'd always offer, hey, you need some boxes to pick your grapes in, and it's evolving. We're changing and we're adding different things. We have flowers. We have a lavender farm. I think the key is diversification. Look, Stuart, they do many different things up there, right, Stuart? You've done events and just a lot of different things. So, but that's what attracts people, because it's kind of how Napa was maybe 30, 40 years ago. It was just small, quaint little places, but a lot of
I
diversification. And
Flower farm there is just beautiful. Lock. I mean, the lavender, dried lavender in your barn. I mean, it's just like out of a story book. Just really a special place to visit.
around. And Chuck Hovey, the winemaker at Steveno, when I started making commercial wine, I would take samples to him for analysis, and we'd sit down in the lab, and he would say, "Well, I think you need to tweak this and that." And he was such a great asset to the community, and such a loss these days. But yeah, Chuck was one of those people that I knew I could always turn to, and just everybody. Gay Callan she was just pat me on the back when I planted the vineyard, going, "Yeah, we need this in this area." And Barton Steveno says, "Yeah, you're doing it right. Just keep it up." It was so encouraging, and there was no real competition. The word always was, well, once Ironstone opened up, everybody says, "Well, everybody's got to drive past the little winery, skip to the big winery," and uh, we all profit from it. So
I think the small wineries are more popular now. I think people want to have that handcrafted. We were doing small batch before that was cool, right, Stuart? I mean,
yeah,
everybody, those are all kind of cliches or little branding things, but we were doing that for years. We were small batch, handcrafted, out there, family run. We've been doing that. That really is what Calaveras County is all about. If people want to get an experience and meet Stu or meet myself, we're around the property. We're here. We're out there, pruning grapes or doing whatever or working there. And I think people really like that. That's part of the experience and the charm and just what we're all about. And I think people just really love that. And that we don't want to be big. I don't, bigger is not better. I think Ironstone is still a family operation. I remember them the first times I went out there, and they just built these big caves, and here was John Couch over there watering, and he was just watering some plants. And I was there with my brother and his wife, and he kind of turns around, he just says, "Hey, what do you think of this place? It looks, do you like it?" And he was talking to my sister-in-law, and she goes, "Oh yeah, this place is really nice." And they were talking for 5 minutes, and then we left, and she goes, "Who was that guy?" And I said, "Well, that's John Couch, the owner." And she was just flabbergasted that he would be doing that. But that's he's that way too. And I think it's even from the top down, the big winery, all the way down to the small. We're that way, and truly, that's what people love about Calaveras County.
I agree.
yeah,
And it says a lot about commitment when you think about the owners, the farmers, the vineyard workers, the winemakers behind the counters and out events in many cases, interacting and greeting and welcoming visitors and locals alike. So it's really a beautiful thing to see. And I think about the formation of the Grape Stomp, and I'll be sitting down with Matt Hatcher here in a bit to talk about how that community event, came together out of.
I was there at the very first Grape Stomp, and it was. I remember we borrowed the half barrels that they stomped into from, I believe it was El Dorado County's wine association, and there wasn't the number of teams that there are today, but it was closing the street. They did that since the late '70s. There was an event going on in October that kind of evolved into the Grape Stomp happening in the park. There was the Oktoberfest going on, and then it kind of morphed into what is today the Calaveras Grape Stomp. And a lot of people don't realize it was going on so many years before.
I know this October, first Saturday of October, we'll celebrate the 27th annual Grape Stomp if all goes well in the world. And so to see it grow now to almost 5,000 people is what we estimate between the Grape Stomp and the street fair. It's really become an annual tradition for locals and visitors alike. So. As we start to wrap up our time together today in interview number 4 of the Calaveras History of Wine series, as we look to the future of Calaveras wine and we take forward what many of you have built and continue to protect and continue to, I think, nurture in many ways, what would be your wishes for the Calaveras wine region?
I think one of the biggest things we have going for us today and from the beginning is we are family owned. There's not a lot of corporate influence in the wineries in this area, and that really has a positive effect on things. So the more we can keep things family, the better. The camaraderie and what we have here is based on the family-owned businesses and their entrepreneurship and energy to just do what's right and try and produce the best quality that they can.
I agree with Stuart. I think Calaveras County, just by its nature and size, we want to, as I said before, keep it small and family operated. But I believe in we're doing this in our property is diversification. I think really agritourism needs to keep growing in this county, and I would like to see more things and variety of things. And I think that's going to help us looking at family experiences and getting different things. We have so much abundant land and water, which is really unique in this county. We have a lot of water rights where we can use that to grow a variety of crops and have educational opportunities in the agriculture and tourism realm. So I think that's an area that's going to keep growing and hopefully get bigger but more personal, but more diversification. I think for us is going to be the key.
Absolutely, and I look forward to inviting guests to come out and explore your vineyard properties with the new vineyard tour program. Hopefully next spring, be able to pick beautiful fresh flowers and bring home wine and check out the pottery studio up at Bryce Station and explore the grounds and maybe stay for a long weekend and enjoy a concert out of the space that you have built that's so beautiful. I appreciate you taking time out today to chat with me about the history of Calaveras wine. I look forward to toasting with you both in person when the time is right. And so I wish you both a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.